Hello and welcome back to episode 83. Today we are casting an eye at the first real replacement model to the original 8-bit Game Boy, with a completely reimagined design and a whopping 32-bit microprocessor, which was aptly called the Game Boy Advance. The handheld was first released for sale March 21, 2001 in Japan and would go on to sell a staggering 81.5 million units worldwide throughout the series, marking the end of handheld gaming from the 20th century with a completely new futuristic and ergonomically engineered 21st century design. But before we get to look at this milestone console, let's briefly look back at our photo quiz question we on this channel call, "What in the world?" And several viewers were correct in identifying the mystery object. It was the Guitar Hero accessory for the Nintendo DS Lite, but there was still another accessory, the Band Hero drum set, in the background. And what's also amazing, is how recent these sets seem to have been sold in my mind, yet, in reality how many years has actually passed. So well done to both CoolFX and Emilio, for correctly guessing this one, and let's challenge you all to see if you can guess today's quiz question photo, at the end of this episode. In retrospect, it's a miracle how long Nintendo managed to milk the shelf life of the original Game Boy series of 8-bit handhelds. With the original being released in 1989, what would become clear, is the system would go on to revolutionize handheld gaming as we know it, even though it was initially in monochrome and had less processing power than even the then obsolete Nintendo Entertainment System. History has it as one of the best-selling gaming consoles. It ended up having much more popularity than many of its competitors, such as the Sega Game Gear, despite that system having a color screen. This was due mostly to the game's library, price and growing brand recognition. However, the Game Boy Advance, which launched in North America in June 2001, was a real revolution in handheld technology. Able to play much more powerful games, and somewhat derisively considered a portable Super NES at the time, the system also became one of the most beloved portable handhelds ever, capable of rendering true 3D graphics on the go. In around 1996, several publications featured reports of a successor to the original Game Boy, which was codenamed Project Atlantis. Although Nintendo was rumored to expect a release of the system within about 18 months, which would make that machine seem to be the Game Boy Color, it was described at E3 as having a 32-bit ARM processor, as well as 3x2-inch landscape color screen, a description that more closely matches the Game Boy Advance, and even perhaps, the SP. So when Japan actually received the Game Boy Advance, it was really a mixed bag, much like the current debate about the Switch Pro, and the fallout over the OLED offering that was forthcoming. The lack of either a front or backlit screen was a huge disappointment, so much so it was tangible. But in general the reception to the GBA was a positive affair, again, likely due to the library of games and the backwards compatibility. So I know some of you dislike the instructions part of the episode, but it has a ton of interesting information, and I'll complete its review as swiftly as I can. Others can feel free to pause the video and read the publication in more detail. Shown here is the various elevations of the console in schematic drawing form, identifying the major components and their functions. Along with Section 2, where several bullet points underscore the new innovations delivered by the Game Boy Advance. An interesting section, Section 6, explains that the original Game Boy games, as well as the dual games, and Game Boy Color games will all play in their original, and somewhat smaller format. However, by pressing the left and right buttons, the screen will redisplay them in the new widescreen format, but this may lead to distortions. While all new advanced games will all take advantage of the wider screen landscape format. Section 8 repeats the information from last week's episode where original Game Boy carts, which were monochrome, will have access to a selection of 12 new color palettes. This programmable option requires that the buttons and D-pad are pushed in a certain configuration and sequence to achieve a brand new look. This hack actually breathes new life into the older games. Multiplayer games, such as the amazing Super Mario Advance, required a set of link cables to achieve. The wiring looks, to be honest, quite complicated and fussy. However, before the wireless option became available, the multiplayer fun required this octopus-inspired routing of cables to join the pre-internet era of face-off gaming. Finishing up with a troubleshooting guide and warranty information, the instruction booklet remains a wonderful reference document. Today we're in 2001, but by 2003 the first revision of the Game Boy Advance SP will be released to great fanfare, and a mere 2 years after that, in 2005, the final Game Boy, the Game Boy Advance Micro, will be offered for sale. So Nintendo kept its winning formula, great games, with well-known franchises such as Metroid, Pokemon, Mario, and Kirby, coupled to what is really just okay, but, in all honesty, simply yesterday's technology consoles, spun into new and original yet somewhat unique ways. This includes a tie-in with a company called Majesco who make video cartridges that had full-color movie and TV shows on them. Gray in color, with a different size retail box, these highly compressed packs pushed the very limits of what was possible. And for me, a transparent gel, or silicone malleable cover was an essential purchase as an accessory. The flush-fitting screen was super prone to scratching, and that spoilt the gameplay in bright light. Contrary to the previous lineup of Game Boy models, which have the portrait form factor of the original Game Boy, which was designed by Gunpei Yokoi, the Game Boy Advance was designed in a landscape form factor, putting the control buttons to the sides of the device instead of below the screen. It was designed by the French designer Gwenaël Nicolas and his Tokyo-based design studio Curiosity Incorporated. As with all previous Game Boy incarnations, there was a whole host of special and limited edition variants from retailers and Nintendo alike. For me, I chose to commission a solid aluminum version from the Boxy Pixel company. With its super bright screen and rechargeable batteries, it meets all my expectations for this easily held, and ultimately comfortable gaming console. But even at its launch, the Game Boy Advance was an amazing leap forward, one that I was highly impressed with back then. The biggest shortfall is also its biggest annoyance. By this I mean, it was never advertised accurately, with an image that truly reflected the screen's true capabilities. It was always shown as if it was backlit. The Nintendo e-reader is an add-on manufactured by Nintendo for its Game Boy Advance handheld video games console. It was released in Japan in December 2001, with a North American release following in September 2002. It has an LED scanner that reads e-reader cards, with specially encoded data printed on them. Similar to the credit card readers in stores, this add-on never made it to Europe for a full release and never proved popular outside of Japan. Depending on the card and associated game, the e-cards are typically used in a key-like function, to unlock secret items and levels, or play mini-games when swiped through the reader. The cards themselves contain data, as opposed to unlocking data already stored on the device or the game itself. The wireless adapter was packed in with the Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green games. These devices were an add-on for the Game Boy Advance. The wireless adapter was originally released in 2004. This adapter hooks up to the back of the Game Boy Advance, and it replaces the archaic link cables, and allows many people to link their consoles together wirelessly at the same time. It was originally marketed for $20 and came included with the games Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. Because it was released so late in the Game Boy Advance's life, fewer than 20 games support this impressive hardware. The adapter's usefulness is most evident in Pokemon, as Fire Red and Leaf Green together with Emerald feature what's known as a union room where up to 40 people can enter to either battle or trade their Pokemon. And sadly we're just about out of time, but we can always find a little more time to quickly offer up today's photo quiz question, that we on this channel call What in the World? And then I've got to ask the obvious question, do you know what it is? If you think you do, then simply add a comment below. If you're not sure, feel free to tune in next week and we'll reveal what this mystery item actually is. And with that said and done, I'd like to once again thank everyone for being here. Please offer up an encouraging like, or thumbs up for my effort. Subscribing would be great too, but as always I'm just glad to have you along for the ride.